West African leaders met in Ghana's capital, Accra, to review sanctions they've imposed on 3 military-ruled countries in the region. Mali underwent coups in August of 2020 and May 2021. It was then followed by Guinea in September of 2021, and Burkina Faso was this January. Heads of the Economic Community of West African states met to discuss this on Sunday to assess efforts to secure timetables and other guarantees for restoring civilian rule in Mali. Now, Guinea and Burkina Faso's Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo said the 15-member bloc would take appropriate decisions after hearing reports on their progress. ECOWAS sanctions of West African bloc studies sanctions for coup-hit states will continue. Adib Saani is Security and Foreign Policy Analyst. He joins us now live from Accra in Ghana. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. Perhaps let's just first start with the assessment of what would be appropriate in these cases. We're talking about 3 different countries, and while there may be similarities, there are probably very significant differences. So how do you go about assessing whether or not these would be appropriate?
Okay, so I just received information from the Kempinski Hotel in Accra, where the summit is being held, that some sanctions have been lifted. For example, economic sanctions have been lifted on Mali. I've always been of the opinion that sanctions is not always the way to go. There are some deep-rooted socioeconomic and geopolitical deficits that cuts across all of these countries that is making their democracies unstable. So if you think that the only way to go to democratize this country is through sanctions, then I bet you have to think again. I have an NGO that operates right here in Accra. It's called the Center for Human Security and Peace Movement. After the sanctions were imposed, we issued a number of communiques, and we were one of the strongest voices in the country that called for the lifting of those sanctions, because it has rippling effects on not just the sanction, but the sanctioner. For example, when sanctions were imposed on Mali, it affected their beef exports, which invariably affected some people in Ivory Coast, Ghana, Togo, and even Benin. In fact, there were some individuals who even protested in Ivory Coast against the sanctions because they thought it was affecting their business. There are some market women who have had their wares locked up in other countries because of the sanctions. This is in the wake of the fact that these countries, for example, Burkina Faso and Mali, are landlocked, and they rely heavily on the coastal countries, especially Ghana, for the goods that come in, even though not all goods were stopped. But of course, it had effects on the country. And sanctions also makes it extremely complex for any country to be able to address simple bread and butter issues, how much more a rather more complex issue of terrorism.
All right, let me just stop you there, because I want us to take it blow by blow. You've said quite a lot and we need to unpack it, so let's just take it a little bit slower there. Let's start with Mali. The fact that you say news just in that there has been a decision to lift economic sanctions on Mali. What makes Mali different in this case in comparison to the other two? And I want to explore this concept of targeted sanctions, as we've often heard the West say in cases where they've imposed them in countries like Zimbabwe, for instance, saying that they are ready to deal with the oligarchs. But as you've said, the impact has often trickled down to the grassroots.
Well, in this case, I don't think targeted sanctions is also the way to go, because hate it or love it, you would need the cooperation of those in charge. So targeted sanctions is tantamount to being in a state of denial about the fact that they are running the country. So we need commitment on their part. And the only way that is possible is to build some level of trust and confidence, okay? So you cannot bite someone, continue biting the person and expecting to have a dialogue with that person. I mean, things don't work that way within the international space, okay? Mali is somewhat different, even though there are some similarities between that country and Guinea, of course, Burkina Faso. We know full well that since the Azawad wanted their republic of, Azawad, a lot of groups, Ansar Din, Ansar Sharia, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, a lot of groups that are mostly Al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliated are operating in that region, okay? And it is in the best interest of ECOWAS to ensure that things go well in Mali. If not, it has repercussions on almost every country within the subcontinent. So Mali is positioned in a very central location because whatever issues we have in Mali, spills over into other countries such as Niger and particularly Burkina Faso. In fact, it is due to our inability to manage the issues in Mali that has resulted in a lot of these militants able to find their way all the way into Burkina Faso. And if care is not taken, might also be able to find their way all the way to the coastal areas, including Ghana, which I must say largely remains untouched by the terrorism scourge.
And just with regards to the other two countries, what are the developments there? What are the discussions by ECOWAS leaders? Are they still thinking of imposing sanctions? What type of sanctions? And as we go back to the original discussions, how is the assessment carried out on what was appropriate? I mean, there must be a list of sorts, and the rationale behind whether you are targeting terrorism, weapons proliferation, what the kind of activity that you're trying to rein in?
Well, so far, we do know that all of these countries have been suspended from ECOWAS, okay? There has been some minor sanctions against these countries, but I'm hoping that I'm yet to get the full facts of the matter. It will be softened so it sets in motion, progress to peace and democratization. And there's also been an approach by ECOWAS, which also cuts across these countries, including Guinea and Burkina Faso, the issue about early election. I mean, let us not be tempted to think that the solutions to the myriad of challenges in Burkina Faso and Guinea is early elections. Okay, because if you have an election without building democratic institutions, it amounts to nothing. No wonder there are some leaders who are so-called democratically elected, who resort to a certain practice that is dictatorial in nature. So I think ECOWAS should shift from its overly ambitious approach to early elections without actually building these democratic institutions. The issues with Burkina Faso is bigger than elections. For example, a lot of these groups have succeeded in capturing territory, okay, in Burkina Faso, and are able to provide services that the central administration is not able to provide, and so have won the hearts and minds of the people. Okay, so I think also that in dealing with the issues, I mean, including democratization in Burkina Faso and Guinea, we need to pay a lot of attention to human development. Human security is the way to go. All these years, despite the existence of MINUSMA, Joint Task Force, G5 Sahel, Operation Bakan, Accra Initiative, and a whole host of it, can we proudly say that we are winning the war against terror? Of course not, because we have overly militarized our approach, and we need to really start talking about the need for the human beings to be developed as a means to achieving what we seek to achieve in the short, medium, and long terms.
As you say, one has got to be sage about the approach and the overall result that they're seeking. So you speak about for instance, institutions of democracy in order to effect democratic processes such as elections. Now, isn't there a similar architecture that must be in place? You were speaking earlier on about being cognizant that when you want to implement sanctions, they also have to be okayed or implemented by those who you actually seek to sanction. So I'm also trying to understand the frameworks that needs to be in place. For instance, if you look at the Central African Republic, if you look at Burundi, the sanctions programs that they followed, they were through an executive order. So I'm wondering then which architecture needs to be in place for the sanctions that are to be instituted to be successful?
Well, I must say, considering the nature of these societies, where infant mortality is high, cost of living very high, a lot of their citizens living within the poverty brackets, a lot of particularly young people without jobs, they've been pushed into uncertainty. They have no jobs. They are becoming frustrated. They are becoming belligerent. I don't think sanctions solves anything. Sanctions don't solve anything, and it's important. ECOWAS recognizes that, because when you overly rely on sanctions, in the wake already of the issues of militancy, insecurity in these countries, COVID-19, and the rippling repercussions it has had on a lot of these developing countries, and of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and its attendant issues, you would realize that a lot of these countries are not able to address simple, basic bread and butter issues.
So let me ask you this question, Adib, before we run out of time. In the traditional jurisdictional sense, how have sanctions changed over the years? As you say, the efficacy has been questioned because of the lack of understanding of the unique circumstances of not only from region to region, but country to country. So what changes have there been, and what do we need to keep in mind as Africa as we move forward on this? Because we've been at the receiving end of some of these things, whether intentionally or not.
Well, I don't think sanctions has changed much, especially in this part of the world we find ourselves. It's more like a template. Target their financial sector, target their economy, target certain individuals you think are complicit in this whole destabilization coup affair. Okay, and that has always been the case. This time around, there's been more commitment on the part of countries, especially bordering these three key countries, to get their commitment towards ensuring that the sanctions are upheld. Okay, but like I indicated, it doesn't solve anything, and ECOWAS really has to re-look at their stance towards these countries. But primarily, the main reason for even sanctioning is to put pressure on the authorities to go according to how ECOWAS wants things to be done. But it's quite obvious that it is not working. I mean, no matter how it has changed, even though it has not really changed much in recent times, it is simply not working. It is rather making the people come out in the streets and support their coupists and think that ECOWAS is rather the enemy. It rather makes the coupists more popular. So I think ECOWAS really has to look at the human insecurities as a means to enhancing democracy in the West African subcontinent.
All right, thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights. Adib Saani, he is a security and foreign policy analyst. He was speaking to us live from Accra in Ghana.